Musketeers again. So you were pleasantly surprised by that integration?
I was, and because this music is absorbs so many influences from so many different places and cultures and whatever, that it's logical that, we should all play this stuff and make a contribution. So yes, it was a pleasant surprise to find that kind of thing was happening here in Charlotte in the area.
Had George and John already started playing in a band together at that point?
When I met them, they were like this. You never saw one without the other almost. I'm sure they had been active in the area for a while before I ever came on the scene. And I was older than them by several years because I'd already finished college and been in service for almost 3 years. So I was probably 25 or so by the time I arrived in Charlotte. And they were barely out of high school as far as I knew. I never did really find out the age difference. But being not having grown up in Charlotte and being in the service and then coming to Charlotte as sort of the newbie in town, I connected with them, but I was a little bit removed because of that age thing. And so, I'd hang out with them. And, George, particularly George, he was just really fascinating to me because I come from a musical background where mostly what I'd played is rhythm and blues. And here's George into all this different kinds of stuff, And musically, there was a lot going on in the early 70s. Mahavishnu had come out, and the rock scene was starting up, or had progressed to the point where it was. But it was just it was almost like meeting somebody from a foreign country or something. And it was really interesting to hear him talk about what he thought about music and what he thought about things. I remember one time I was talking about having trouble putting a composition together, and I said, George, how do you get inspired? He says, well, I could just look up and see 3 trees and think, okay, I can do a composition in 3 parts. And I thought, okay, that makes sense in kind of a tangential kind of way. But he had that kind of mind that he could create. I mean, his creativity level was so high to me that he could make something out of anything. And that fascinated me.
And what sort of process did he have? I mean, it sounds like he did quite a lot of experimental stuff, but also could just jam in jazz bands.
Well, the other interesting thing about him and the unique thing, he played guitar upside down and backwards. And I was a guitar player too, but not as good as him. But that fascinated me right away because I'd never seen that before. It's like, how do you do that? So he could do stuff that a normal guitar player playing right-handed, right side up, wouldn't find difficult to do, but because he played the way he played, it was very easy. So he had a different take on the instrument itself and the concept of playing the instrument just by being odd or left-handed and backwards. I've met other guys like that since, and it's really interesting to hear them play because what they can put into the music that you're playing that doesn't sound like any guitar player would play. They have their own personal thing just because of the way they approach the instrument. So that was the first thing that fascinated me about him. I really never got to work with him in putting songs together or composing or whatever. We just played together on gigs, and I got to hear him play, and we hung out some. But he was probably way ahead of my curve, at least compositionally, because he was doing what he was doing. And I was sort of on the fringe of things.
So when you would hang out together, what sort of, would he talk mainly about music? I mean, what kind of personality was he?
Yeah, he would do that or just anything. I mean, he wasn't a big sports guy, so, but the intellect of what he was thinking about at the time, it was really fascinating. I can't think of specific examples because it's been a long time ago. But just, hanging out and talking about music or talking about whatever interested either of us at the time and sharing experiences, of course. And like I said, coming from sort of a different place and not growing up with those guys, I had a different take perhaps on things than they did, but they certainly had a different take on things than I did. So it was interesting to exchange points of view on some subject or music.
All the varied musical influences or things that he listened to, I mean, were they was he talking about people and groups and music that you hadn't even heard of?
Yeah, probably. Again, I don't remember that many examples, but we were into learning how to play what is come to be known as modal jazz. And some of the songs would be Maiden Voyage and Red Clay and stuff from Herbie Hancock and Freddie Hubbard and guys like that that were coming out in the early 70s. These were sort of the jazz tunes that were popular with young guys because, first of all, they were compared to playing Charlie Parker tunes or John Coltrane tunes, they were easier to play. So it's easy to learn on. But George was, he'd been listening to rock and roll, and I don't know how much R&B background he has. I'm sure he had some, but he had a pretty wide variety of experience to draw from. But as players playing together, we were focused more on playing jazz stuff, and in his own compositional things, yeah, he would, where he got what he did, where he got it, I don't know, but he came up with some really cool stuff.
What was the difference in personalities between him and John?
George was the focal point, and John was the supporting cast, I guess you'd say. And if you think about it, George being a guitar player, he can function in a bunch of different roles. He can be the lead voice, he can be the supporting cast, being an accompanist, or a combination of the two. So if I'm playing with him, if I'm playing saxophone, so my role is to get up and be the lead voice and then get out of the way for somebody else. I don't really accompany that much on that instrument. So while I'm playing, George is accompanying me. Then when I get out of the way and he plays, he becomes the lead voice or the front person for the group. John's role as a drummer is a supporting cast. He's the guy behind everybody, holding everybody up and making them sound good playing drums. So, he would obviously have drum solos and stuff, but his primary role is to support everybody else. And they fell into those roles personally as well, pretty much. And it's not that I didn't really sense any conflict there ever, but it was just the way their personalities came together. George was pretty much the predominant one and John was the supporting one, but contributing. It wasn't like he was just a yes man. Certainly he contributed, but that's the way it seemed to me that's the way they fit together.
Now, a couple of people mentioned that George took to keyboards because he got frustrated with the left-handed guitar thing. Do you remember that?
Yeah, guitar. That may have happened before I came along because I knew he played piano when I arrived on the scene. And actually, I played some too, so we had that in common. But probably, guitar has some limitations in that you only got 6 strings and 5 fingers. But with piano, you got 88 keys and 10 fingers. It's like having the orchestra under your fingers to some degree. So you get a better sense of the breadth of what you're trying to do playing piano because it's all there. And so you can figure a bass line up and some chords and a melody, and to the degree that you can play, you can put it all together and it comes out as the song that you're working on. So I understand exactly what he was saying. Mm-hmm. And he, from what I remember, he was a pretty good piano player. We may have both played what's called arranger's piano, meaning we knew chords, but we didn't have the skill, the real fluidity to be really great piano soloists. I certainly don't have that kind of skill. But the knowledge of the keyboard is vital to anybody who's serious about this music, that to have that orchestra under your fingers or jazz band under your fingers kind of idea to be able to put stuff together. That's really, really valuable.
And where were they at in their career at the time of the accident?
Well, they were really, really well known in Charlotte. In the music circles, I mean, they were the top 2 guys, or certainly right up there in the top tier of players in town. And, I'm not sure when he had done the music for the movie. I don't know whether it was before or after I met him.
It was 1974. 74 and 70, I think it was 74 for both schools.
Okay. So they were involved in that, and I wasn't, I wasn't involved in that too much. So by the time the accident happened, they were probably on the verge of doing great things. Not that they didn't already, but maybe getting more recognition, certainly. And having done music for the movie would certainly have done that.
How did you hear about the accident?
I was at school. I was in the first year of grad school at University of Miami. And I remember it was late in the school, late fall, when I heard about it, and it's right before exams. And I got a phone call or something from somebody, and I was just devastated because, I felt like I'd lost 2 younger brothers or something. And I went to the head of the department, the jazz department, and I said, "Look, man, 2 friends of mine, really good friends of mine, have been in an accident. They both were killed, and I need to go home to." And the guy said, "Fine, don't worry about it. We'll get your exams when you come back." So I just left 2 or 3 days before exams and drove home and was able to catch up with everybody to be around to mourn the loss. And the whole music community was just devastated. Went to see his mom. His mom was, she wasn't functioning too well. And I remember seeing his dad too, and his dad was just, he didn't say anything. You could tell he was, George and his dad, there were some issues there, I'm quite sure. But I know he was just bereft. I don't know how to express it because he was really sad. And he really didn't say anything. I just remember the look on his face, and the pain was really evident. It was incredible. And then I had to go back to school. So I lost touch with the aftermath of what had gone on, and I ended up staying down in Miami for years and years. But when I got back up here, I guess in the early 90s, the first thing I did was look up some of the same people that I had gotten to know back in those days to find out what they were doing, were they still playing, whatever. So just kind of picking up where we all left off. Unfortunately, George and John weren't with us.
Mm-hmm. And what did you think the music community lost with the accident?
Well, a really great creative spirit that you really never saw George sad too much. He was pretty much up, looking forward to doing stuff, happy-go-lucky, whatever. And I don't think I ever really saw him in a down moment. Maybe he was less ebullient on one day and more so on another day. But I don't think George was ever depressed about anything, to be honest with you. But that kind of energy is a real beacon for a lot of us who were trying to learn how to play, and then see this guy doing what he does and doing it so well that it's inspiring. And so that spark of creativity and inspiration, I'm sure, was a big loss to this community. Like I said, I left to go back down to Florida and didn't have the opportunity to kind of be around after the accident, after all that happened, and sort of heard secondhand what was going on. I'd be home in the summer and check out stuff, but it wasn't like I was still living here.
All right, great. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Just one thing, when we were on the phone, you used this really beautiful phrase that you said, you thought George was a genius who thought in melodies. And I still remember that, and I just, it struck me as being really such an interesting point of view about his musical process.
Well, I can't really remember the difference between he and I had gone to music school and studied all the theory and all that kind of stuff. So I'm coming from this very structured background and, follow all the rules. And George that was the furthest thing from his mind. Man, he's like, oh, wow, this sounds good. I'm going to use that. And I would look at the same thing going, okay, how does that fit into this? And does this fit the puzzle over it? And he didn't care about any of that stuff, man. It's just like, oh, look what I found. Isn't this cool? How you like this? What does this sound like? And that was inspiring to me because I didn't think that way at all. And Maybe I think more that way now, I hope so. But his sense of discovery was what was really cool about hanging with George, is you never knew what he was going to come up with, but more than likely it'd be very cool and you'd like it. That's, but it mystified me because I couldn't understand that. It took me a while to get my head around, okay, I guess that'll work, just come from different places. But to see that in action was an inspiration.
That's great. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you so much, John.